When is the right time to stand up for freedom? Could it be when you start to feel creating children who'll inherit the pain and the debt of this nation and be slaves to the banks that cause hyperinflation, who are masters of commerce, lies, and bad legislation? Whoa, if you looked in the eyes of 1,000 young children through fences of razors, their innocence stolen as the red flag of tyranny flies in the open, is that when you finally notice? Whoa, whoa, but I'm only a stranger here. I'm a long, long way from my home, and they say I can't change all the things I find strange, but what can one man do alone?
Welcome back to the Liberty Test, the show where we take government policy at its word before we put it to the test. I'm your host, Dan Castello, and tonight I'm joined by fellow libertarian activists Robert Schuon and Rose Leatherman. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to honor another devoted libertarian, Pam Tangretti, who was a member of Suffolk County Libertarian Party and a fighter for the cause of liberty for many, many years. She will be missed. So tonight I had a completely different show planned. I was expecting to dive into Governor Hochul's surprise endorsement of nuclear energy. But then Tuesday happened, and when I say Tuesday happened, I mean something that nobody saw coming just a few months ago.
I
A
saw it.
33-year-old Democratic socialist named Zoran Mamdani didn't just upset Andrew Cuomo in the New York City Democratic primary, he crushed him. So here's what happened. Mamdani ran on a platform that would make Bernie Sanders blush. He wants to freeze rent for over 2 million New Yorkers living in rent-stabilized apartments. Not reduce increases, not cap them, freeze them completely for 4 years. He wants the city also to own and operate grocery stores that would compete directly with private businesses. He wants to eliminate fares on every city bus. He wants universal free childcare for kids up to age 5. He wants to raise the minimum wage to $30 an hour by 2030, and he wants to pay for all of this and more with what he calls a $10 billion tax increase on businesses and the super rich. And here's the kicker. It worked. Voters loved it. They turned out in record numbers, especially young voters who hadn't voted in previous primaries. They knocked on 1 million doors for this guy. They made his campaign videos go viral. Cuomo, with all his name recognition, all his union endorsements, and a super rich PAC that spent over $24 million against Mamdani, couldn't stop it. Mamdani had endorsements from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders. He had economists from around the world signing letters supporting his economic plan. He had union leaders calling his victory the future of the working class, and now he's the presumptive Democratic nominee for mayor of the largest city in America. But here's what I find most interesting about this story. Mamdani's supporters aren't just saying these are good policies. They're saying these policies are legitimate because people voted for them. The message is clear. If enough people want something, democracy gives government the authority to make it happen, regardless of who gets hurt or what rights get circumvented in the process. So tonight, I want to ask a question that goes beyond just whether these policies are good or bad, although we'll certainly discuss those. I want to ask specifically, if enough people vote for socialism, does that make property rights optional? So think about what we're really talking about here. If I own an apartment building and I've been charging market rent, but 51% of voters decide my rent is too high, do they now have the authority to freeze what I can charge for 4 years? Or if I own a grocery store and I'm trying to make a living, but a majority decides food should be cheaper, can they vote to have the city compete with me using tax dollars, including my own tax dollars? And there's another wrinkle that makes this even more complicated. Mamdani didn't win with a numerical majority of all New Yorkers. He won with a majority of people who voted in a Democratic primary. So that's what, 10% of the city's population making decisions that will affect everyone who lives there, everyone who owns property there, everyone who does business there. Millions of people. Now, the problems Mamdani is trying to solve are certainly very real. New York City is insanely expensive. People are being priced out of their neighborhoods. Working families can't afford rent, can't afford groceries, can't afford childcare. These aren't made up problems, and I think we'd all agree they deserve serious attention. But the question I want us to wrestle with tonight is this. Does the fact that these problems are real and that people voted for these solutions make them legitimate? Where are the limits to what democracy can vote away? And who gets to decide where those limits are? So, all right, with that, I want to bring in the panel and find out what you guys think. Who wants to tackle the question of whether voting makes these policies legitimate?
Wait, so all right, so if I get enough people together, we can make it rain, right? Like we can bring down the rain and feed the crops. Like, is that the way this? I guess I'm confused.
Well, I think it's more a matter of if we're all in a room together and Dan and I both decide that we want your money, so we vote for it. Does that make it acceptable for us to rob you? But again, did we agree to having? Did we agree that we wanted majority rule, or is that something we were just born into?
Well, so if we're gonna go down that road, like, hey, there's a lot of buildings that companies have abandoned, right? Could the city just go ahead and make those free housing now? I mean, there's lots and lots of room, and they're not, they're really not paying that much in taxes because these companies are all gone out of there. This is, the socialist mindset is very strange to what or the average people, the average American, because it's like I want it, so I should be able to get it.
Well, okay. I think it's important to understand why people are drawn to socialist policies. Okay, most people most people are working adults. All they know is they're working a full-time job, but their rent keeps increasing, their utility costs keep increasing, the money that they're being paid to do their job used to buy them 2 weeks worth of groceries. Now it buys them at best a week's worth. They can barely afford to put enough gas in their car to get them to and from work. Okay, they've had to cut all luxuries out of their lives. Forget saving for retirement. They can barely make ends meet. Okay, why is this happening? I mean, we know why it's happening. It's the monetary system. It's economic policy. Most people are not aware of the mechanism by which their costs of living keep increasing, though, and so they end up they blame the wrong targets. Like, for example, all they know is their grocery prices keep increasing. So who's the closest target that they can blame? The grocery store owners. Clearly they're just being greedy and they're jacking up their prices. Okay, their rent increase, clearly the landlord is just being greedy and they're raising prices because they can. They're not looking that far ahead, and that's why these policies seem so appealing to people.
Well, they need to look 3,000 miles away, because this is exactly what's being done in San Francisco, and how's that working out for everyone over there? Because
all people know is that they already can't make ends meet, and if their rent goes up, they're gonna completely fall into the abyss. So the idea of a rent-free sounds very appealing, and as far as they're concerned, their landlord is just being greedy anyway. They don't need that additional money. They're not considering the fact that property taxes keep increasing every single year, utility costs are skyrocketing, and the profit margins on rental properties are not very high unless you own the property outright, which most landlords don't. Most of them are still paying mortgage on them. Like, they're barely making a profit.
I would argue that they're not making a profit. Most of them are barely breaking
the property. Right, it's the property itself that's an appreciating asset, and that's kind of a whole other can of worms why exactly real estate became an appreciating asset. But anyway,
well, before we get into the weeds, I want to ask you guys something simple. If I walked up to you on the street and said, I'm taking $50 out of your wallet to buy groceries or to help pay for heating for my neighbor because I think food and heating is too expensive, you'd call that theft, right? But if I get 10 of my friends together and we all vote that you should give us $50 for the same reason, have we somehow transformed theft into taxation? And what's the difference?
Well, there is none really. I mean, it's just a different mechanism, and it's a mechanism designed to make it sound quasi legitimate. And that's the problem with socialism is they try to cover up what are attacks on fellow human beings as, well, this is for your own good or for society's good, which is a high order abstraction, which basically eliminates all of the actual steps, which includes doing this at gunpoint because you
Right. Well, I
obey
mean,
or we will arrest you or kill you.
right. You're describing the state, which is at the end of the day, just the gang that won. It's the gang that has the most power that now has the air of legitimacy to it. But again, like I guess my point back there was like it's important to understand why people are voting for these policies. Okay, they sound good, but ultimately they are not going to fix the problems.
So is it the majority of people that get to decide where the limits are? Like, here's another way to look at it. If we all agree, and I think we do, right, that there are some things democracy can't vote away, like we wouldn't say that 51% of people can vote to bring back slavery, right? Or to establish an official religion, right? So we already accept that there are limits to what majorities can legitimately do. And I think the question is, where are those limits and who gets to decide where they are, right? Because libertarians, we have a pretty clear answer to this. We say that your individual rights, life, liberty, property, pursuit of happiness, these aren't up for a vote. They're not privileges granted by government that can be revoked when it's convenient or if enough other people decide that, they want that. These are inherent to who you are as a human being. They're inalienable, right?
Right. I mean, per libertarian philosophy, okay, we start with the principle of self-ownership. You own yourself. By extension, you own your labor and you own what your labor produces. That includes justly acquired property, something that you homesteaded yourself or that you acquired legitimately from a previous owner. That is an extension of you. That is yours to do what you want with, and therefore you are being aggressed against if someone decides that they can dictate what you do with your property or they try to wrongly deprive you of your property.
Yeah, I think most people, including most politicians, seem to believe that rights are whatever the majority says they are, subject to whatever limits the majority is willing to accept at that moment based on a bunch of calculations. But in effect, rights are privileges granted by the will of those in power. And that brings us to what I think is the real significance of Mamdani's victory in this primary. It's not just that New York might get a socialist mayor, it's that his campaign represents a generational shift in how people think about the relationship between individual rights and collective decision making. So the voters who turned out for Mamdani weren't just voting for free buses and cheaper rent. They were voting for a fundamentally different vision of what government can and should do. They were saying that if something is a problem and if it affects enough people, then government has not just the authority, but the obligation to fix it, regardless of whose rights get trampled in the process, right?
Right. And we, like I explained previously, we are seeing why that's happening. Okay. People are getting increasingly desperate and they're turning to the government to solve their problems because they don't understand that government policy is what caused their problems in the first place. And that what would really fix things is less intervention by the government, not more of it.
All right, so let's accept the fact that government has created problems, and at this point, given the reality of New York and especially New York City, we're not going to get Libertopia overnight, so maybe government needs to continue to meddle to at least mitigate some of its damage. Are these specific policies the right way to go, or is there something else that government could do that maybe it wouldn't be
Well,
ideal?
this is right down to socialist. Like if you look at every socialist state, they make the same promises. Okay, Cuba made the same promises. Russia made the same promises. China has made the same promises. And guess what happens? Is that who pays for it all? This has always been the problem with socialism, is that it takes from the productive to pass it out to mainly the people in power. I hate to say to people, but that's what it is. And the lower class, or the struggling, get the crumbs that are left, and it's never enough. Again, give a perfect example. $30 an hour minimum wage. So no matter what job you work, okay, you have to make a minimum of $30. Fast food worker, $30. Okay. Somebody who walks dogs on the street, $30. Okay. What happens to those jobs when that goes into effect? Okay. You know what happens. We all know what happens, is we're libertarians. Okay. Is that those jobs go away. Because you've just raised the bar.
Greedy dog walker business owner just has to pay his workers more.
Yeah, you're just trying to take advantage of those high school students.
That's exactly,
who need to make money after work.
And it's literally, it's a philosophy of hatred is what it is. Because it's, you have something I want, so not only do you not deserve to have it, but I have the right to take it from you. And by the way, forget that. Don't forget the addendum to that, which is by force if necessary. Because that's always behind the socialist arguments, is if you don't want to give it to us, we will take it from you and maybe leave you bleeding in the street as well. And this has always been let's get down to cases here, because that's the thing, is that here we are as libertarians. We're like, hey, you have the right to do something or not to do something. That's your choice to make. And your transactions, your economic output should be voluntary. Okay? If I want eggs, I have to either give you money or give you labor to buy those eggs. And it's a mutual agreement, because nobody's going to give you eggs if you're not doing enough for them. And you're not going to be happy if you're paying an exorbitant amount of either money or labor to buy those eggs. So it has to be a mutual agreement. You're not doing it at gunpoint. You're not forcing the other person to hand you this product. On the other hand, the socialist model is, well, we're going to pick government who has the money, has the authority, has the violence, and take it for you. How is that any different than mugging? I mean, really.
I think the sophisticated socialist argument is that people who have resources and better information about the market and how to use those resources in the market have an unfair competitive advantage, which allows them to make a lot of
because
money.
They're more educated and smarter and worked harder.
Right, or something, but the point is...
That's the argument is that
okay, those
you
eggs,
should work hard, do all this stuff, work your fingers to the bone, and then give it all to somebody who hasn't done any of those things.
The argument is that those eggs were clearly, you raised chickens, you had them lay eggs. Those are meant to be eaten, but under the capitalist model, you're more concerned about profit, so you'd rather throw those eggs out than let them distribute. These are the arguments.
Name a farmer that throws their eggs away. That's what I want to see.
Doesn't the government pay farmers to throw food away?
Government pays farmers not to grow food.
Well, actually,
and that's the government. So there's your argument right there. Is why is the government doing that?
Thrown away. Yeah. Okay, we'll get there. Yes. Lots of food is thrown away. Mostly because the issue is transport and storage.
Why is it illegal to give food to the homeless?
And also the fact that there is also a reason.
All right, we got to focus
There's also
here.
a reason why it's illegal to give it away for free more often than not. But the argument is, hey, that food was produced to be eaten. Wouldn't it be nice then if we could use it for its intended purpose and distribute it to people, and in return you get other benefits? That is the argument.
Who decides?
Well, that's the thing. Outside of a very small intentional community, you start needing a centralized state to manage the economy. And as we know, the more centralized an economy is, the less efficient it is, and the more open to corruption it becomes.
All right, well, let's steelman the socialists again here and say, what about the so-called food deserts in the city? There are places where the free market is obviously failing. It's not providing what people need,
Really?
even basics. And so, what about the city-owned grocery stores? Mamdani wants to use public purchasing power, as he phrases it, to sell food at wholesale prices. I mean, he's still buying the food from somebody private. It's
Oh,
at
are they?
prices.
Because is this their political cronies? You see, here's the problem
Well,
is
that's the
that
thing. There's nothing private. Very few things are private in this economy.
You mean a government contract might go to someone who's connected instead
oh
of
no,
who's...
never. I mean, come on. Like this is and you know, would you like to start labeling that? I would name the players, but I don't need any more lawsuits. So, you know, it's like, but there are, you know, the politically connected are always the ones that get these contracts. It's so much waste. It's so much. And if you look at it objectively, okay, the free market does, it's almost uncomparably better than any kind of government entity trying to do the same job. It's the old joke about who will build the roads. Because in a free market economy, the roads will get built because people need them and they're willing to pay to have it done. Whereas the government is paying to not get this done, to take as long as humanly possible. It's a system that pays only the politically connected and everyone else languishes, and we're told that it has to be this way. And no, it doesn't. Because what ends up happening is the government is so bad at things like that that they end up hiring private companies to do the work. I'll give you, there's an example. Remember the Kosciuszko Bridge? Anybody remember that bridge?
I'm upstate.
Between Brooklyn and Queens? It's so famous because it was about to drop into the river. It literally was that bad. And what happened was they got so desperate to get this bridge replaced that it was handed to a contractor with the get it done, we don't care philosophy, but you have to get it done quickly because the bridge is in such bad shape.
But it's not their money they're spending.
How long did it take to build the new Tappan Zee Bridge, the Mario Cuomo Bridge? Okay. How long did it take to build the one over 6 months? 6 months, done, finished, out, and working to this day. So don't tell me that socialism could do anything faster or better or more efficiently than private enterprise.
Right.
Because when socialism fails, it falls back on that private enterprise to get the job done because they know that they have to. And
well, there's a reason why every attempt at state socialism has ultimately had to implement state capitalism. Like the Soviet Union did this with the new economic policy. Okay. China did this under the Dengist reforms.
And I've heard stories that that's falling apart now. So
right, I mean, China is a capitalist country. The idea that it's communist is pure hope. They have a communist party running it, but it is a capitalist country. The state just has a lot more control over.
But they own it. The story I actually heard it yesterday or today, that they are demanding that anyone who works in China from outside, read this as U.S. workers, have to declare for China and follow all of their internal rules. So basically become a Chinese subject if you want to continue to work in China. And
well, yeah, they don't want to lose their grip on power.
It also sounds a lot like what the United States requires.
Anyway,
okay? But
I think
these people left to a man, to a person. They left China in one day. Like, I'm out of here. See ya.
You're raising a question here.
Too much intervention. I think we should go back to
how much is too much? Right now, how much is too much? See, before you use that word, how much is too much intervention?
Well, I think we should get back to the food deserts that Dan brought up.
But they're there because it's too expensive.
Why do they exist in the first place? Yes, because of government policies that make it. Well, first of all, the way they define food desert, they'll often only they're only counting
no stores. Yeah.
They're only counting official grocery stores. Like oftentimes they'll exclude things like farmers markets and other places that sell food. Also, though, oftentimes these sections of the city that are declared food deserts, like they're often subject to all sorts of exclusionary zoning requirements. Okay, so if someone wants to open a small mom and pop grocery store, like the licensing fees and the taxes and the business all the other fees that they have to pay, like they may be so prohibitively expensive that they're not able to do that. Okay, it's a government created problem, and now people are complaining, hey, we don't have anywhere we can go nearby to buy food. So now the government is saying, okay, well, we'll solve your problem. We'll open government run grocery stores.
Yeah,
Okay, what's
you
going
mean
to happen
like
there?
in the coal districts back in the day when everybody was kind of trapped in their own little town and you
Uh-huh.
had to buy the groceries at the company store. And everybody ended up indebted to the company and you couldn't leave because if you tried to leave, you owed the company more money than you could ever pay. You didn't live in your own house, you lived in a company house.
Sounds like a hideous capitalist system.
Yeah, right. Well, in a capitalist system, you would basically leave because what can they do to you? But in these systems, when you have your whole family trapped and you're run by one entity that controls every aspect of your life, okay, how do you escape? And people they walk away. They literally just walk away, see ya, and go elsewhere.
Well,
But
you raise a good point about government control. If they compete with private businesses, and I think we should discuss whether that's ever legitimate at all. But let's just say government moves in, they think there's a market failure, they start offering a service like grocery stores or free buses or whatever, and by charging less than the market rate, they drive private businesses out of the market,
Uh-huh.
which leads to an expansion of the desert, which leads to an expansion of the government supplied product. But if you look at places where the government directly supplies goods and services, I think the quality and the quantity of those services is almost always inferior, right?
it is
To what,
inferior.
Well,
yeah,
here's what's going to happen with the government grocery stores. Government has the infinite money cheat. Okay, they have the ability to sell things at a much lower
At a
price. Okay, they have
loss.
right at a loss basically because they can just print more money. Okay, they already are the ones paying subsidies to farmers for producing certain goods. Yeah, they can sell things at far lower prices than any private entity could. They're also not dealing with things like licensing fees and property taxes and whatnot. So the ultimate outcome is that private grocery stores are going to go out of business. Now, here's what's really going to happen down the line. Who's going to be in charge of what is sold at these government-run grocery stores?
The
The
government.
government. So,
yeah, but the
for
government is
example,
people, so there's going to be some functionary who gets that job.
what's really going to happen here is once the government is in charge of what's being sold at these grocery stores, are we going to have the same selection of products that we had at the private ones? No, we're going to have lobbyists
Oh
deciding,
no.
hey, we need these things sold. Yeah, red meat is bad because it raises everyone's carbon footprint. Therefore, we don't really think that this should be sold in government grocery stores. Okay, if people want that, they can go to a private grocery store, which have all been regulated out of
Which,
business. And buying
geez,
from your local
elites,
farmer
right?
can't be done because it's illegal under all these various regulations. And see, here's the thing. People seem to think that like if the government has some reason why they want to outlaw red meat consumption that they're going to make it illegal. They don't have to do that. They can just
Yeah.
basically regulate it out of existence by making it impossible for people to access it.
Forget
Okay,
the red meat.
government
Where's my
run
32-ounce big gulp, man? I'm going to lose the
Well,
big gulp
they don't
again.
even have to pass regulations, though, is what you're saying, Rose. They can
Yeah.
just, by being the largest purchaser, by being the largest distributor, they become the market. And so
Mhm.
even private people selling into that market are prisoners
Right.
of what the government is
They have
willing
a
to
new
buy.
policy saying that they will not buy steak from farmers because steak is bad because it's bad for the environment. So they're not going to sell steak in their government run stores. So if people want that, they can go elsewhere. Well, pretty soon government run grocery stores are the only grocery stores in your town, so you effectively cannot get steak. Like This is what's going to happen. The government's
then
going
what
to have
happens is
far more control over the food
there is
supply.
actually a free market reaction to this, because then
Black
what happens?
market.
The black market pops up, and it's
Well-
just like everybody looks at. Here's the war on drugs. Here's a perfect example of a government policy that
Mhm.
tried to eliminate this, and what ended up happening in real life. In real life, all you have is a million under the law, under the radar suppliers. That it's the same thing. People are going to be sneaking. Think about this. People are going to be sneaking London broils into Midtown Manhattan. All right, and selling them on the street. Going,
Underground
dude,
meat market,
I got your
apparently,
meat. I got the meat.
For
Okay,
exotic meats that don't
it's
have like
insane.
official standards in the U.S., like you can buy
Yeah.
various meats on
And
the
how
black
long will
market.
it be before the government starts to poison the meat to show you that meat is so bad for you, as they did during Prohibition, where they poisoned the alcohol? See, this is government
that's
policy
actually
in action.
that's still a thing. That's still a thing. If you want to buy like solvent ethanol, they add all sorts of crap
They
to
add
it.
stuff
It's
to make
only
it poisonous. Yes.
so that to avoid the manufacturers get to avoid the high taxes that come with these stuff that could actually be drinkable.
Yep.
It's just that now you can buy drinkable alcohol, so most people aren't going to resort to drinking solvent ethanol. But when that was the only thing around, people went ahead and drank it anyway, and you ended up with more deaths from alcohol poisoning.
Yep.
Yes, these are the downstream effects of government intervening in the market and trying to tell people what they can and can't buy and how they can do business with one another.
So is it ever legitimate for government to compete directly with private business?
It shouldn't
Well,
be. It
if you-
should be completely illegal.
I mean,
If
that's
there's a government
the
bus.
question of whether government is legitimate in the first place. I mean,
Okay,
Right,
but let's
but
say
the
we
point
live in a
is-
covenant community where everybody has agreed to the rules in order to live there. So it's a completely libertarian society. And the board gets together and they agree with 100% consent, they're going to subsidize a bus service. Okay. Just like Mamdani wants to do. They're going to subsidize a bus service, and there's people obviously who like drive Uber or whatever, and they're going to be like, "Oh, you're going to put us out of business." Well, the community got together and decided that they want this. Is that legitimate?
Well, first of all, it's never 100%. That's the other thing, because at the very least, there are other people like the taxi drivers. Okay, why does a New York taxi medallion cost $5 million?
It's because people are always trying to create guilds, and the purpose of guilds is rent seeking.
Yeah. Okay, and believe me, I've seen this from the other end, because back in the day, they had rent control in New York City. Back, my grandmother in the Bronx had rent control on the apartments, and even though the rents was skyrocketing, she had to pay, get paid the same amount no matter what. It didn't matter how much your heating oil cost. It didn't matter how much your electricity cost. It didn't matter how much the maintenance cost. You were not allowed to raise the rent. Well, the problem with that is that you run out of properties. What property owner in their right mind is going to run those properties at a loss? Nobody is. Any business owner has to make a profit. It's not a maybe. It's not a rule. It's an economic law, okay?
It's not just an economic law. It's about fairness. Socialists love to talk about fairness.
Yeah.
Isn't the essence of fairness two people make a deal and they both benefit from it? And isn't that capitalism?
That is. That's the essence of free market economics. Is I have something you want, you have something I want. We come to a mutual agreement. No violence, no force. We decide this is what I want, and you decide that's what you want, and we're both happy. This whole thing, it's not a zero-sum game. There's not a winner and a loser here. There's two winners.
I don't know. I think if you're hungry or you're poor, and like you were about to say, the socialists are like, you have those eggs, I need those eggs. You refusing to give me those eggs is extortion.
And what if I was going to take that money to feed my kid? What do I do about that?
In the case of rent control, the idea was, okay, once you have someone living in one of your units, in your apartment units, you basically have a captive audience, so therefore it's predatory if you suddenly jack the rent way up. Okay, here's the problem though. Like if there was actually a decent supply of housing and people could easily move out, find new housing on short notice, and relocate their family, you would not there'd be nothing to gain from suddenly trying to double their rent because they would up and leave.
They do it now. I mean, today's like basically these big corporations that have come along and bought out these places, they come
I was getting
in
there.
and they triple the rent, right? What happens?
Oh yeah.
The tenants all leave.
I'm getting there. Yeah, like yeah. If people could easily move, there would be no benefit to suddenly doubling someone's rent. You can only do that when there is a limited supply of housing. Okay, what causes the limited supply of housing? Regulations on building new living complexes, regulations on expanding the housing supply. Okay, in that case, yeah, rent control will, well, it sounds like a good idea in theory. If the cost of running an apartment building keeps increasing, eventually, yeah, you're going to have landlords having to rent out at a loss. Eventually, they're going to go under. Then what happens to those buildings? They get bought up by even bigger landlords. And this, okay, repeat this process enough times, and eventually you have only a few giant politically connected corporations
and slumlords. And what happens
that buy out all the properties because they can.
They give the minimum that they can get away with. Okay, they don't do basic required repairs because it costs too much money. Well, because it costs too much money to do, and the rents don't equal it. They're still having to pay off the city, the taxes, all the business fees, all of the other expenses that come with owning property in New York City, and they're not getting back what they're putting into it. And again, the thing is with these socialist ideas is that they all work when you have somebody giving you money through the back door. So like so far, New York City has been kept afloat because the federal government passed billions and billions of dollars into New York City. Okay, if and when, and it will end at some point, if and when that gravy train stops, this will fall apart faster than most people realize.
Why would it end? This is how the government maintains
socialism
control.
works until you run out of other people's money.
We'll never run out of money. They can just print more of it.
Yeah, you think so. That comes to an end too. But I'm talking about the little microcosm of New York City.
I guess as long as it doesn't come to an end during the term that these guys are elected, that's all they care about.
And now you know why politicians kick the can down the road as hard as they possibly can, because they want to delay the reckoning.
I think something important to point out here. Okay, Mamdani himself may describe himself as a democratic socialist. I have no doubt that he is well-intentioned. He may be a true believer in these ideas. However, if he, and again, this remains to be seen. He won the primary. We don't know what the outcome is going to be in November. If he's able to win, I mean, this may sound cynical. I don't mean to destroy anybody's dreams about a win for the working class and a working class uprising. However, it will be because he was allowed to win. Okay, if anyone who ends up in office is there because the ruling class wants them there.
Yeah, but that
people
again,
running
it falls apart.
The people running this country do not want to eliminate private ownership of the means of production. They want to be the ones in charge of it. They want to own everything, and they want to turn the population into a perpetual renter class. So the policies he's proposing, such as rent freezes, which will eventually price landlords out of their own property and force them to sell to what will end up being giant politically connected private entities, benefit them. Same with grocery stores for the reasons I described earlier. They'll run all the private grocery stores out of business. These ultimately benefit the corporate overlords who are actually pulling the strings.
It's a way to centralize ownership.
Right. Yeah. It's more ultimately
it's more fascist. It's literally a fascist type system because.
So yeah, he himself may be a socialist. It would take a full-blown 1917 style revolution to bring about socialism in this country. What we're going to get is a type of fascism. We're going to get nominally private organizations who provide all the goods and services, and we're going to have a huge centralized authoritarian state.
Yep. I mean,
Yeah.
the problem's going to be, though, the money will run out. It always does. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And what happens then? That's when the riots start. Okay.
Yeah, but they get very creative.
Well, they
There's
print
so
more
many ways
money.
they
They
come
run
up
a
to disguise the
No,
money.
we're talking about New York City. Don't put this at a national level, because the national. See, again, let's
Who's
say
gonna cut off New York City?
let's say the big orange man in the White House says, you know what? We're cutting you off. We're not going to just throw money after money after money into New York. Okay? What happens then? When that tap gets shut off, that tap of free money flowing into New York from all these other states, what happens if that tap ever gets cut?
Well,
Okay.
what we've got is a mafia-style political system where
Mm-hmm.
you've got, you know, different gangs operating with different regional, reaches, and some gangs pay up the chain to other gangs and so on. I don't think it's really in the interests of the people at the very top of that pyramid to allow, the lower down uh, links in the chain to completely collapse. I think they use that as a threat. They've got the
No,
stick, they've got the carrot, and they balance that, to
they
try
try
and
to
get
balance
what they
that.
want.
The problem you have is that at the bottom, the resources get less and less and less and less. And it's a slow process. It takes time, but there is a tipping point.
Yeah.
Okay. And you end up, what was it? There's some famous, you know, this summer where a day like today, when it's 95 degrees outside and nobody has the money and nobody can own an air conditioner, and they're out in the streets, and the city goes, no, 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 we need to save water. And they shut off all the fire hydrant sprinkle. Remember all that? You know what
Yeah.
happens then?
Yep.
Okay. I've seen stuff like that.
Oh,
And
it is a crisis, but yeah, there is a breaking point, though.
but the problem is no politician believes that there is. They all want to believe that they can keep doing this and it never will end.
They trot things out slowly. Like they introduced the idea of vaccine passports. There was too much backlash. So now they've walked that back, and now they're kind of starting to creep back towards that. But now they're saying, oh, no, 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 this isn't the vaccine passport idea. That was a terrible idea. No, no, this is just to prevent, this is just to make sure that you're not an illegal immigrant or something. Like there's always a slightly different reasoning behind it, but the end result is always the same. We're preventing terrorism. We're preventing criminals from coming into this country. We're preventing contagious illness from spreading. Like, yeah, they don't believe that. They think that they can keep instituting things incrementally and that people will not rebel.
Well, I
I think a lot of people believe that. I
Are
also
they wrong?
think
I mean,
higher up the food chain, they want the collapse because, like you said, they can snap up even more control when the collapse
oh
comes.
yeah, I mean, look what happens when riots actually did happen. We saw this throughout 2020. Like, why were in some cities, like there were areas like where people were running around setting things on fire. Like, what happens eventually when, okay, a bunch of small businesses are burned down, people can't afford to repair the damage, their insurance won't even begin to cover the damage. Okay, the neighborhood is destroyed, there's nothing left, a few people who live there leave. What's going to happen eventually? Venture capitalists move in and buy up all the property at a super cheap price, and then they gentrify the area. And
Well,
then
that goes to your point,
Yeah,
Bob,
but that's
because ownership of assets, like physical hard assets, is ultimately the way to protect yourself
right.
from the collapse of the monetary system.
Yeah, but that's the thing is that I actually think we're further down the road than most people realize, because the fact that this last election was such a shock to those that would be the controllers, that many people stood up and said, we're tired of this. And then, I'm not saying they're right or wrong or any political figures one way or the other, but there was a deep-seated anger in the country as to what is going on. And they wanted certain things, and it's pretty clear And guess what? It's not happening. And especially places like New York City, instead of trying to fix some of these problems, they're throwing in, they're going all in on the socialist agenda. We're going to make the government in charge of everything. You're going to work for the government. You're going to do it at the prices we say. You're going to get the money we say. You're going to get the food we say, and you're going to ride to work in the bus that we say. And we're going to do all this, and you're going to like it.
Again, all people know is they can't get by, but they're getting their cause and effect backwards. They're blaming the market, and they think the state is the solution, even when the state is the problem and the market is the solution. You need to get the state out of the way.
The state is the problem, and then we come along with our principles and our philosophy, and people see us as holding some kind of luxury beliefs, like, oh, you care about things like property rights and voluntary exchange. I care about feeding my family.
Like, oh, you care about money. No, I want people to have access to things like affordable housing. I want you to be able to drive down the street and buy steak and eggs and vegetables from your local farmer, who currently is probably prevented from selling to you because he doesn't have the correct licensing, and he's not.
This goes back to the whole raw milk thing, because again, this is another thing that the state has jumped in on.
Oh yeah,
you can't buy raw milk because it's not safe for you.
Raids on your farm if you're selling raw milk.
Yeah, right. And they'll send. Did you hear about the story today? There was this kid who was mad because the traffic lights in his town were so screwed up because the technology was like 20 years old and it was programmed incorrectly. It was completely wrong. So he took it as a personal project. He hacked into the system. Okay, rewrote the software so that it was operating 100% more efficiently. It was amazing. Cleaned up all of the traffic jams in the town, and he got arrested for tampering with the system. And it's like, but see what's happening. Look at the reaction. He's got like 50,000 petition signatures already. And again, this is where, and I was posting on there because there is always jury nullification. Okay, if you're a juror in a trial against him, I would absolutely ban us now. I would be asking for a jury all the way, because guess what? You're going to tell me 12 people are going to convict you for fixing the traffic problem.
Well, they're very selective about who they're allowed to be on a jury. So,
I still demand a jury.
Keep in mind, viewers, keep in mind, you are obligated to be honest. If you're ever selected to be on a jury, do not, under any circumstances, lie about the fact that you know what jury nullification is.
Yeah,
that's all right. I better rein you guys in. Let's test this conversation against our platform. So we've got section 1.4, which talks about personal property rights, and we have section 2.3, I think, which talks about voluntary
agreements and free exchange.
Yeah. So to anybody who doesn't really understand, they're going to look at that and be like, oh, okay, it's just some philosophical stuff. But I want to hear you guys explain for our audience why this underpins the core protection against all the things we were talking about before that were bad outcomes from government meddling. Because, Bob, I think you pointed out that we're a bit further down the road than most people are on this subject. And I want to show them why we're so adamant about these planks of our platform, because this is what builds the wealth that raises everybody's standard of living. Right?
Why did the amendments to the Constitution specify that you have the right to not have your property searched and seized without due process? And the reason for that is because as a person who is self-governing, as a person, you have the right to acquire property, and you have the right to be safe on that property, to have the government, specifically the government, not allowed to come in unless they can prove in a court of law that you have done something wrong worthy of them coming onto your property. Okay?
Well, if we're talking about the Constitution, that's a set of limitations on what government is allowed to do.
We say that too, because individuals have the right to access, own, acquire, utilize, and dispose of assets, because these are the outcomes of human dedication through the investment of time and effort. And no matter how socialists try and spin it, they take your time, your effort, your hard work, your capital, your property that you worked hard to get, and they steal it to give to somebody they want to. So basically, you have no rights. They have a right to everything you own, including you and your labor. Because when you start questioning them a lot more closely, you begin to see that that's what they think, is that you should be working for them, that you are owned by the state, and that is their right to do so, okay, no matter what you think and no matter what you've acquired in your life. And this is, to the average American, this is incredibly frightening because, again, you work as hard as you can for as long as you can, and you have something, and then the government can step in and take it away.
And to be clear, it's not the government, it's people using
people using the name of the government to do this. Perfect example was that whole case in Connecticut where they took a family's home that they'd owned for 60 years to build a shopping mall. And then the shopping mall fell through, and guess what? It's an empty lot now. So they stole these people's 60-year-old heritage because it's good for the people. No, no, it's not. It was good for the politicians.
Have the ultimate say. If society decides that they have a better use for your property, why do you get to be selfish and hold on to your property? Yeah,
because exactly. Rose, you didn't build that.
Yeah,
society created the circumstances.
Yeah.
Okay, you might have actually done the physical work, but that was the last 1%.
And bought the boards and dug the
they'll
ditches.
Say that they built the roads because and then they pretend that no one else could have come up with the idea of building those roads.
Sorry, first private road in America was Motor Parkway on Long Island.
Private roadway. Sucked anyway.
Was the first major thoroughfare in the United States, and it was a private road. Thank you very much.
In that case, then, guys, let me drill down on what I think should be probably the final point before we wrap up. What's the relationship between democracy and consent when viewed through the lens of libertarian limits on what government can legitimately do?
Well, this is why we're a republic and not a democracy, because a democracy is the old example
wolves and a sheep voting on what's
wolves and a sheep, and it's no, you have the right, you have the certain rights, and they're enumerated, but they're also not limited by the Constitution. People forget the Constitution is not a limit on people; it's a limit on government, and it's the same thing here. Our document, our platform is very clear that people have rights because they're human beings, okay, and that those rights cannot be stripped away by government. Now, government tries to do that, and they do it by force, they do it by fraud, they do it by every method they can, but that still does not take away your rights. It just means that they're stealing your rights because they have force. And that's another reason why libertarians believe in the Second Amendment, because you have the right to defend those rights. And that's number one. That's
no. That's just about hunting, and you don't need that semi-automatic for hunting. But no,
I want a ship with cannons, just like in the old days.
Under what circumstances would democracy be justified? Well, I would say that in a voluntary society, like if you voluntarily join a community, and the upfront, you're told, okay, things are decided by democratic process, we vote on how we want things to be run, and you knew ahead of time and you consented to it, yes, that would be an acceptable form of democracy. The issue is when you just happen to be born in a certain location and you're told that, this is just how things are. People have the right to vote themselves your property. They have the right to vote your rights away. That's where it becomes a problem.
Well, that's the thing. It all comes down to consent.
Yes.
It's always consent. And
did I sign a contract, or is it one of these social contracts that's not actually a real thing and does not hold up?
I'm one of those
scrutiny?
people that the real life part is the part that I'm most interested in, because we could talk about theory all day, and we all agree pretty much on the theory aspect of it. But
Yeah,
in
but
real
you're going to
life,
sell us on the idea. This ain't a luxury belief here. This
no,
is underpinning of a
this is,
civilization.
but this
Well,
is
people
something that
usually. Oh, go ahead.
the thing is, people may not realize consciously what is going on, but inside, this is why they get so angry, and this is why you're seeing a lot of this backlash, that people are getting more and more and more angry, because whether or not they consciously realize that their rights are being taken away, inside they know it. They know it because you can't avoid it as a human being. Most people have brains, and they can figure it out. They don't want to believe it because it takes work, and it takes courage to stand up and say no. But there will be a point. There is a tipping point where enough people say, "That's it." The old line from Network. I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
Right. Well, what usually takes is the state coming after something that you hold dear.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I once talked to this person who, like, when they were a teenager, they helped plant a garden on their city property, and it was a vegetable garden, and apparently that ran afoul of some stupid regulation.
It's a zoning law
So
and regulations. Yep.
agents of the state showed up and destroyed the garden in front of them. Like, or for example,
They're
like
lucky
you
they
might
got
be,
out of there alive. I mean,
oh yeah.
it's
Yeah, I mean, imagine if they had resisted. They could have gone even
realize
worse.
how many
But that
municipalities,
radicalized them against the state.
having
Also,
fruit trees on your front lawn is illegal in a lot of places.
in some places, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, also, like, okay, so for example, suppose you make your living braiding people's hair, and then the state steps in and decides you should have to have a license. How do you get that license? You have to go to a state-sanctioned cosmetology school
Mhm.
and take out massive student loans, because the school that gives you those licensing, or that allows you to fulfill the requirements to get the license, has a state-sanctioned monopoly, so they can charge whatever they want. So therefore, you're priced out of the field that you went into in order to make a living. Like, usually it takes the state coming after something and directly affecting you, because when the state is just taking your neighbor's rights away, it doesn't hit close to home for most people. Okay, but the bigger and more invasive the state gets, the more people are affected, and the more people start wanting to push back. But as of yet, look, they've done a great job at keeping themselves one step removed and giving you someone else to blame, whether that's your landlord or your grocery store for
keep an eye
prices
on
being
San
too high.
Francisco. Keep an eye on Chicago, because that's the future. Okay, this is the future of the socialist movement in the big cities. Okay, and already we're starting to see, especially Chicago, you're starting to see pushback. People are saying, "I don't care, that you might be the same race as me, or that you have a similar belief structure, but I can't feed my kids. I can't keep my neighborhood safe. Okay, I can't afford to live here anymore." That deep-seated resentment does explode after a while.
That's the worst fear of the people who are in charge. That's why they are so desperate to keep people divided. I remember, like, a couple weeks, or maybe like a month ago, like, my social media feeds were full of race baiting content. It was the weirdest thing. I'm like, did I accidentally interact with something, and that's why I'm getting? I asked other people, they're like, no, I'm getting the same stuff. Like, they will do all sorts of division psyops to keep people angry at one another and blaming one another for their problems and fighting amongst themselves, because if the 99% were to figure out who's actually screwing them over, yeah, that is the scenario that the 1% wants to
tar and
avoid.
feathering would be the least of their
That
problems.
may need to be the key takeaway from this episode, but we're getting further and further away from the idea of a socialist mayor. I want to rein it back in, see if I can sum up what we've covered tonight and what people can take away
one
from
more
this.
comment before we go is that keep in mind that the reaction to this socialist mayor may not be the joy that certain people think it will be. Okay? Because we've had mayors that have gone down that road. And the last mayor I remember David Dinkins? And who replaced him? Okay, and that's an interesting story. What's going to happen when they go full socialist?
Right.
Where do
Or
we go from
again,
there?
if he wins, he was allowed to win because clearly he's benefiting somebody.
But what happens then?
He
Well,
would have
he's
been
going to be
kept out of the race entirely by some bullshit requirement or something, or people showing up to vote in the primaries to find that their voter registration had mysteriously changed to independent, which, by the way, happened throughout New York City in 2016. Like, again, he would not have been allowed to get this far if he was actually
Possibly.
a threat to the system.
It's going to
Well,
be, but
I think we're going to have a lot of interesting things to talk about, especially if Mamdani wins. But we've touched on his platform, but I think we've identified the real issue here. This isn't just about rent freezes or
no.
city-owned grocery stores or $30 minimum wages, right? This is about a fundamental question that goes to the heart of what we believe about individual rights and the consent of the governed. And the question is this: are your rights, your right to property, your right to voluntary exchange, your right to control your own economic decisions, are these things that belong to you as an individual? Or are they privileges granted by the majority, subject to revocation whenever it's politically convenient? So Mamdani's campaign represents something bigger, in my opinion, and I think it's the consensus of the panel tonight, than just one politician or one city, right? It represents a generational shift in how people think about the relationship between individual rights and collective decision making. So any of the young voters who turned out for him, they weren't just voting for cheaper rent and free bus rides, even if that's what they felt, was driving their decisions. They were really voting for a fundamentally different vision of what government can and should do. They were saying that if something is a problem and if it affects enough people, then government has not just the authority, but the obligation to fix it, regardless of whose rights get trampled in the process. They were saying, in other words, that democracy, or at least what they call democracy, trumps everything else. And here's what makes this particularly dangerous. Nearly every problem Mamdani is trying to solve has been made worse by previous government interventions. Bob, like you were saying, look at the other cities where it's been tried, right? So rent is sky high, partly because of zoning laws, for example, that prevent new construction. Food is expensive, partly because of regulations that make it harder for new businesses to compete. Childcare costs are through the roof, partly because of licensing requirements that limit supply. So we have a situation where government-created problems are driving people toward government solutions. And when those government solutions fail or make things worse, the answer is always more government. It's a vicious cycle that ends, if not in the destruction of civilization, then with people like Mamdani promising that if we just give government enough power over enough areas in our lives, they'll finally get it right this time. But here's what I think we need to understand. This isn't just happening in New York City. This is a preview of debates that are happening all across the country, in cities and states where younger, more progressive candidates are challenging the old guard with promises of government solutions to every problem. And the scary part isn't just that these candidates are winning, it's that they're winning by convincing people that rights are whatever the majority says they are, that consent means whatever the government decides it means, and that individual liberty is a luxury we can't afford when there are problems to solve. So what do we do about it? Well, first, we need to get better at explaining why individual rights matter. It's not enough to say taxation is theft or rent control doesn't work. We need to help people understand that their rights aren't granted by government and can't be legitimately taken away by a vote, no matter how many people participate in that process. Second, we need to address the real problems that drive people towards socialist solutions. We can't just criticize Mamdani's policies. We need to offer better alternatives. When government makes housing expensive, we need to fight for zoning reform and regulatory relief. When government makes starting a business difficult, we need to fight for deregulation and free markets. When government creates problems, we need to solve them with freedom, not more government. Third, we need to build actual alternatives. If you're frustrated by politicians like Mamdani promising government solutions to government-created problems, don't just complain, build something better. Start local. Work with your county Libertarian Party affiliate to organize events that show what liberty looks like in practice. We have direct action plans ready to roll out on many issues, so just connect with your local affiliate and they can guide you. And here's something concrete you can do right now. There are businesses in New York City that will be directly affected by these policies if Mamdani wins in November. Support them. Shop at independent grocery stores. Support small landlords who provide affordable housing without government subsidies. Show that voluntary exchange works better than government control. Fourth, get involved in local politics. I know, politics is terrible and politicians are worse. But here's the thing, most of the policies that affect your daily life are decided at the local level. Zoning laws, business regulations, property taxes, these are local decisions made by people you can actually meet and influence. They're not all corrupt globalist shills, okay? So if you want to stop the next Mamdani before he gets started, you need to be involved where it matters. And finally, we need to think seriously about the question of consent. Because if we can't explain why majority rule has limits, if we can't articulate why individual rights matter even when it's inconvenient, then we can't really explain why liberty matters in the first place. The good news is that we're not alone in this fight. As Bob points out, there are people all across the country who understand that freedom isn't something you vote for, it's something you live. They're starting businesses, raising families, building communities, and solving problems without waiting for government permission. They're proving every day that voluntary cooperation works better than political coercion, that individual responsibility creates better outcomes than collective control, and that the best way to help people is to get government out of their way. So join them. Find your local Libertarian Party chapter and get involved. If there isn't one, start one. Attend town halls and school board meetings. Run for office yourself or support candidates who understand that individual rights aren't up for a vote. Because at the end of the day, the choice isn't between Mamdani's socialism and the status quo. The choice is between a world where your rights depend on what other people vote for and a world where your rights belong to you because you're a human being. We believe in that second world. We believe that freedom isn't something government gives you. It's something government should protect. And we believe that the best way to solve problems is through voluntary cooperation, not political coercion. If you agree with us, don't wait for the next election to make a difference. Start building that better world today. I'm Dan Castello, and this has been the Liberty Test, where we don't simply hope to vote our way to freedom, we build it. See you next time.
Where will you be when the order is given to censor your mind as free speech is forbidden, as martyrs for peace from the world will be driven away by the sound of a bellowing thunder and choke on the blood of a dream going under? Tear up our Constitution, and from every direction we cry revolution, standing together and without permission, soldiers for truth in the war of attrition, the love of our country as our